Would you take a moment and pray with me? Most merciful and gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, sometimes pastors have experiences that no one will ever believe. And it's not just pastors. I bet some of you have had those things happen to you. Anybody have something happen to you? You just don't think anyone would ever believe you if you told that story. Well, I read this week about a pastor who had one of those moments. His name is the Reverend Dr. James Barnett. And he tells the parable that's found in our gospel lesson this morning in a very different way. He puts them in his own context and reminds us that the lost are sometimes right at our own doorstep. He tells it through the experience he had of having Donnie come visit his church. And he tells his story and the gospel lesson this morning like this. Donnie staggered into a post-worship service reception for prospective members in a downtown church where I was serving as an intern pastor. Ordinarily, he would wander in before worship, asking just for a few dollars to get a meal. This time, his arrival was later than usual. The prospective members, all decked out in their Sunday best, tried hard not to appear offended by his presence. Like Donnie, Jesus could throw a wrench into the finest religious function ever. Indeed, nobody could ruin a Pharisee gathering like the eccentric Nazarene called Jesus. 3 times in Luke's Gospel, Pharisees invite Jesus to their homes, and every time, the gala takes an unpleasant turn. And at one gathering, Jesus bypasses the ritual of washing his hands before the meal. And instead of apologizing for the oversight, Jesus thunders 6 woes at the Pharisees that were present that day, condemning them for their own impurity. At a dinner party hosted by another Pharisee, Jesus rebukes his host for judging a woman who wipes and kisses his feet with her hair. The nerve of this Nazarene, invited by one of the chosen few for a dinner party, only to come into his own home and offend him. And now, the 3rd time, at the home of a prominent Pharisee, Jesus' very presence has attracted tax collectors and other sinners. The riffraff are infiltrating the suburbs, and once again, the party starts to sour. And it sours all the more when they see Jesus welcoming and dining with the sort of people that they didn't invite. Hearing their indignant huffs and whisperings, Jesus responds not with woes or rebukes this time, but with story. He spins a trilogy of parables, all of them with the same plot. A character is lost, the character is found, and to celebrate the finding, a party ensues. Now these are good stories, 3 back-to-back yarns that remind us how God's talent for finding us is by far greater than our talent for getting lost. But based on popularity, the first 2 do not seize the limelight the same way the final story does. Compared to the prodigal son, the stories of the lost sheep and the lost coin are scant in detail. They lack the conflict and the drama that make the prodigal son parable so engaging. These first 2 parables seem a mere preface, perhaps an overture to the climactic opus of the lost son's return home. Perhaps the biggest reason that people like the final story best is that the subject of lostness is a person. Why does Jesus even begin with these stories of lost characters using a sheep and a coin? Why not launch right into a story about a human being that attracts people? Perhaps he began with these non-human characters, because Jesus' listeners that day saw the sinners with whom Jesus dines as less than human. Perhaps Jesus is stepping up to that high and holy crest from which the righteous Pharisees gazed downwardly at these lowlifes who are dragging down their party. If so, then why not use a sheep or a coin as metaphors for these second-rate souls? Now, before we judge the Pharisees, at least too harshly, let's cut them a little slack. Reverend Barnett argues, it would not be out of the question for them to connect with the sheep story for some other reason. Indeed, the other character in this story is a person, and the man in that parable is at least somewhat well-to-do. He's not a lowly shepherd, but rather the owner of the sheep, and he owns at least 100 of them. One sheep goes astray, gets separated from the flock. The sheep owner leaves the other 99 to go and seek out the one. Now, what might a Pharisee be thinking to himself as he listens to a story like that? Well, of course, they might say, they go back to find the sheep. That's his livelihood. He needs his inventory squared away. And while sheep are not gold or frankincense, they are not dirt cheap. And certainly, this well-heeled businessman had hired help to watch over the other 99 in the open field. Good for him, surmises the Pharisee. Good for him for being aggressive and diligent enough to hunt down that one lost sheep. Sounds like an enterprising fellow. You know, I could see us making a stop by that man's celebration party. We need not stay long, just drop by. We can bless his house and make an early exit. Perhaps we can say something like this. So sorry we can't stay. We have to get back to the temple and take care of business. I wonder if they even get what Jesus means when he concludes that there will be more rejoicing in heaven over a repentant sinner than the 99 righteous persons who don't mean to repent. And then Dr. Barrett questions us. He wonders if we do. But Jesus moves on to the second story, one about a coin. Once again, the character is a person. But this parable had to be a bit more difficult for the Pharisees to appreciate. Of the three parties held in this gospel lesson at the end of each parable, this would be the party least likely for these men, holy men, to attend. The person in the story is probably a lowly woman, maybe a poor village peasant, living in a house with no window, hence the need for a lamp. The picture is of someone of lower class, someone lower than the sheep owner. Even the coin that she loses speaks to her being in a lower place. The subject of lostness is not a living, it's not a breathing creature, but a thing, an inanimate object. Many suppose that the coin was a part of her family's savings, but if so, it was not a great sum, for it was the equivalent of one day's wages. And when compared to a sheep and a son, the coin is the least valuable commodity. But it is of great value to this poor woman, and she searches carefully until she finds it. And to celebrate her finding it, she invites her friends to come and rejoice with her. And then Dr. Barrett challenges us again with another thought. But would Jesus' listeners attend this party? Not likely, he says, for the bash is hosted by a woman. We do not know whether this woman is married. She might be alone for some scandalous reason, or perhaps she's a widow. She could even be a single mother. If nothing else, since she is poor, she is perceived as cursed. Go to her party? Likely a unanimous no among the Pharisees. Best stay away from that one, they would say. Need not be seen in her presence with her people and taint our good standing. I wonder if they hear Jesus say that even the angels rejoice with her. And Dr. Barrett questions us too. I wonder if we do. And that brings us back to Donnie. Donnie, who crashed